Zenith Greyrat, the hottest of moms in anime. Gentle, cute, sexy, and has a healing touch. No, seriously, she knows healing magic. Zenith's portrayal in the anime was fantastic, showing off her loving side, her doting side, her energeticness, and sadly, yes, even her brokenness. Betrayed by her husband with the one that she trusted with her family's caretaking. But what anime-onlys might not know is that Zenith got an entire chapter to herself. A chapter that was sadly condensed and repurposed for a final send-off to the season 1. Extra chapter, The Mother of the Greyrat Family, was actually included in the first volume, taking place before Rudeus was even sent off to tutor Edis Greyrat, containing Zenith's history, giving light to how she's seen her son, Rudy, the events of Lilia's pregnancy, and her insecurities of her family, all culminating into an emotional realization that cannot be missed. So that's what we're going to cover in this segment of Skip content. So let's dive into Extra Chapter, The Mother of the Greyrat Family. Her name was Zenith Greyrat, born in the holy country of Milis, a land with a long history, great beauty, and rigid moral code. She was born into nobility as the second daughter of a count. Like most young ladies in good families, she was a sheltered child, thinking her own small world was all there was. Growing up clueless and naive, she thought she was a good child, never disobedient, excellent grades, following the tenets of the Milis church, and played her role in social gatherings. Folks called her a perfect picture of a Milis lady, and her parents were proud of her. In due time, she'd be introduced to a man by her parents' choosing, probably the first son of some Marquess, and see her name go down in the register of the Milis nobility as a perfectly respectable Marchioness. As a woman of nobility, that was her path in front of her. But that's not what she followed. When she turned 15 and came of age, she had a terrible fight with her parents. It was the first time in her life she refused to do what they told her. She ran away from home after getting thoroughly sick of them controlling everything in her life. Her little sister Therese had always been a free spirit, and Zenith believed that she was a little jealous of her as well. Side note here, yes, Therese is the woman that we see in the goblin slaying episode. She's the one that Edis saves. So it's kind of funny to hear from Zenith's perspective way back here that her sister was free-willed. And yet over here, we see that she joins the Knights. These factors, along with many other small ones, pushed her off the path that she had been following. While it wasn't easy as a fallen aristocrat to find a new path, she fortunately was proficient in healing magic from the academy and was proficient in intermediate spells. Milis was a country where healing and protection magic flourished, but it was still unusual to progress beyond beginner in either. So it kind of shows that Zenith was kind of a cut above the rest. Reaching intermediate tier opened up the possibilities of working for the Milis Church's hospitals. It was an achievement that earned Zenith much admiration in her school. This made her convinced that she would make it on her own anywhere she went. She was really hopelessly naive. A dishonest group of people spotted her almost immediately as she awkwardly tried to navigate taking a room at the inn. They claimed that they'd been looking for a healer and pulled her into their party. They took advantage of her ignorance, offering to pay her lower than what a beginner tier magicians earned, insisting that it was higher than usual. She had been a complete fool and took up their superficial kindness at face value. At the time, the group made her think that the world had decent people in it, and they probably would have mistreated her more if she stayed with them. At some point, probably using her as a human shield in battle, cast magic until she fainted, or maybe demand sexual favors. However, they didn't get a chance, thanks to a young swordsman named Paul Greyrat. Enter Paul. Enter the dirtbag Paul. After beating down her new friends, he rather forcefully dragged her into his traveling party. She was convinced that she was being kidnapped by a violent thug, but thankfully one of his companions, Elise, explained everything. That all said, this was how she met her future husband. At first, she hated Paul. He was an Osirian noble by birth, but language was coarse. He broke promises left and right, acted impulsively, wasted money, and mocked her constantly. Not to mention, he routinely groped her butt and made highly inappropriate advances. Still, she could tell that he wasn't exactly a bad person. This goes back to that whole chapter that I covered with Lilia. It's like, why do they see something else in him? He was always coming to her rescue after all. He made fun of her cluelessness, but in the end, always stepped in to help her. Both Zenith and Paul were total opposites, but he was dependable, free-spirited, and handsome. It was no surprise that Zenith grew attached to him. There was always a pretty woman around him, and she was a follower of the Milis Church, which preached the virtues of monogamy. She may have run away from home, but the teaching of her faith had been drilled into her head since childhood. So one day, she blurted out these words: "You can sleep with me, but only if you never touch any other woman again." Paul immediately agreed to it with an easy smile. She knew he was lying to her, but on some level, she didn't mind. Once he broke his promise, she thought she might be able to finally get over him. But once again, she'd been naive, careless, and foolish. She never considered that she might get pregnant after a single night with him. She was so hopeless, anxious, and afraid. She never expected that Paul would actually do the honorable thing and marry her the way that he did. The child she bore with him was a son, Rudeus Greyrat, her little Rudy. Cutting forward to the present, Aisha and Norn had just been born, and Rudeus has yet to leave to go tutor Eris Greyrat. Rudy was crouched next to his little sister's cribs with a very serious expression on his face, much like his father's. Frowning intently, he peered into one crib for a moment, then looked over the other. After Norn gave a fuss, Rudy stuck out his tongue and made a silly face, nodding in satisfaction as Norn gurgled happily. He then resumed his serious expression. After Aisha piped up out of nowhere, Rudy pressed his palms to his cheek and mumbled a silly noise. Aisha responded with a happy giggle. Rudy once again nodded to himself, a grin of pure pleasure. He was keeping up this routine for a while now. At the sight of him, Zenith couldn't help but let out a little laugh of her own. It wasn't something you seen every day after all. Rudy had always had on the most serious expression. No matter how things went with his sword practice or his magic, he never looked particularly satisfied. He almost never let Paul or her see him smile. And when he did, it was usually a forced, awkward grin. But now, he was making silly faces to amuse his little sisters and smiling genuinely. Just watching him put her in a good mood herself. They had come a long way from where things used to be. Sighing quietly to herself, Zenith recalled Rudy's early years. At first, she was overjoyed when they discovered that he had a talent for magic. But after a while, she started to feel like he was so talented that he secretly looked down on the rest of them. It made Zenith wonder if Rudy even loved his family at all. He never really got that attached to her for one thing, but she had it all wrong, of course. She realized this in the midst of the family's greatest crisis, the day that Lilia announced her pregnancy, and Paul confessed that he was responsible. Zenith felt terribly betrayed by Paul and Lilia, so angry and so sad. In particular, she was so furious at Paul for breaking his vows to her that she was ready to explode. She was on the verge of either screaming for Lilia to get out or that she herself would be leaving. It took an effort of will to keep herself calm. Before her marriage, she expected Paul to prove himself a liar and planned on dumping him once he did. She had almost forgotten about that, but apparently her feelings hadn't changed. She was so upset that she was ready to break apart her family for good. But in the end, Rudy changed her mind. Playing the part of a guileless child, he stepped in and guided things to a neat conclusion. His methods weren't exactly admirable, of course, and even if she believed his little story, it certainly wouldn't have convinced her to forgive Paul. Still, from Rudy's words and the expression on his face, she could see what he was really feeling deep down inside. He was afraid, terrified his family was gonna break apart. The moment she realized that, she finally understood that he did love them in his own way. She wanted nothing more than to reassure him. Thus, her anger softened, and she managed to bring herself to forgive both Paul and Lilia on the spot. If not for Rudy, things wouldn't have worked out that way. I always love this aspect of the story of Mushoku Tensei, where you have characters, from their perspective, see something that Rudeus himself isn't even thinking. Yes, we get a lot of perspective about Rudeus in the situation right here, where he didn't want this to fall apart. He didn't want this stuff to break. And additionally, yes, he understood that Lilia was always supporting him. He wanted to pay back Lilia for the fact that she's always there for him. Whenever he's cold, she's got a blanket. Whenever he gets stuck in the rain, she's ready with a hot bath. She's always there for him. And he wanted to support her. And plus, yes, he knew that if Lilia left, she and, yes, most likely her baby, but also maybe her, would die. But here, Zenith sees something different. Zenith sees that he's afraid of losing the family. And that's similar to the whole situation with Sylphie. When we finally get a perspective of Sylphie, it's always talking about how Rudy was shaking. When he first chased off the bullies in Buena Village, his legs were shaking. When he was being dragged off by Goliad, his legs were shaking. He doesn't internalize this when we're reading those segments of the story. He never thinks about that. But other characters see something that he's not internalizing. I always love this additional step of seeing how Rudeus acts that only other people can really see because he's not thinking about it. It's just subconscious. It's instinct. It just happens and he's not actually thinking about it. And we'll get into more of this kind of stuff later on when we're actually seeing how he's actually caring for both Aisha and Norn. And unfortunately, even during the segments that we're covering Rudeus, he doesn't really talk about this too much. This is really our first glimpse into his appreciation for his sisters and his protection of his sisters. Zenith watched as Rudy played with Norn's little hands and smiled happily. Her ever-serious son was soothing his sisters with silly baby talk, calling her cutie pie, and that she would turn out pretty just like her mom. Zenith thought, he's so reliable. She had been in awe at Rudy's talent for some time, but lately she was starting to appreciate his dependability as well. Things had been truly hectic after Aisha and Norn were born. Their two new daughters cried all hours of the night, puked up half the milk that they had fed them, and routinely pooped when they were bathing them. Lilia told her that it was perfectly natural, that it was expected, But in no time, Zenith was utterly exhausted. For days and days, she barely got a wink of sleep. However, Rudy stepped in and started handling all sorts of things without being asked. He was oddly skillful with babies. It almost seemed like he had cared for one before. Although that couldn't be the case. But maybe he had picked up a few things watching Lilia. That's Rudy for you. Nope, again, his previous life knowledge. Zenith was a bit conflicted about Rudy doing a better job soothing her child than her, but it was an enormous help. She'd never seen a boy his age so helpful and reliable, even capable of looking after a newborn for that matter. Watching him work reminded her of her brother, who probably was still back in the holy country of Millis. Like Rudy, he was serious, diligent, and talented. Zenith's father always told them to learn from his example, but he was cold to his family and ignored his sisters almost completely. As nobles went, he was a good and honest man, but was nothing of a brother. Rudy was obviously going to be different. He was going to be a good big brother, the kind who earned his sister's admiration. I totally forgot they mentioned that Zenith had a brother right here and how she's comparing the two of them. How, yes, they're both insanely talented. And yes, in both ends, you'd probably say, look up to them, follow their example. But unlike my brother, Rudy right here is taking care of his sisters. I never got that from my brother. That certainly seemed to be his intentions, at least. He'd actually announced at some point that he was going to be the coolest, most perfect big brother ever. Zenith was already eager to see what the three of them would be like in a few years. Norn cried out loudly, which startled Zenith out of her thought process. Rudy's body jerked in surprise, but he quickly turned to Norn and made more silly faces. However, that didn't work this time. Rudy ended up checking her diaper to see if she was wet, then lifted her up and checked to see if she had any rashes. If Zenith was on her own, she had probably gotten flustered and called for Lilia, only to fall right into an outright panic once she remembered that she was out shopping. But Rudy stayed admirably calm, working by process of elimination. After a while of checking Norn, Rudy clapped his hands and turned to Zenith. He claimed that it was time for milk, which made sense as hours flew by as she watched Rudy play with his sisters. Zenith lowered herself on a chair that Rudy pulled up for her. She opened her blouse and took Norn into her arms. Norn had clearly been hungry, just as Rudy thought. She immediately pressed her little mouth on her chest and suckled greedily. The sensation always made Zenith intensely conscious of her own motherhood. After a moment, Zenith realized that Rudy was watching her. Whenever she breastfed Norn, he tended to stare. It wasn't just a curious, innocent gaze either. There was an element of interest that you wouldn't expect from a 7-year-old. It was cute to see him doing something that was so much like Paul did, but if Rudy was always like that at his age, it was probably going to be trouble down the line. The last thing that Zenith wanted was for him to go around breaking women's hearts like his father. She spoke up. "What's the matter, Rudy? Do you want some too? Huh?" Rudy was startled by her joke, jerking his head away and blushing. "No, that's not it. I was just impressed by how much she was drinking." Zenith gave off a laugh. "Sure, Rudy." It was a bit cute seeing him flustered. "Sorry, but I need my milk for Norn now. You had plenty when you were a baby. So don't get greedy now, right?" "Of course, mother." Rudy agreed easily enough, but he had a slight hint of regret in his face. Definitely an unusual reaction coming from him, and an extremely adorable one. Maybe she'd tease him more. So she spoke up again. Well, if you're that desperate, once you get yourself a wife, why don't you ask her if she'll give you some? Good idea. I'll have to try that out someday." Zenith wasn't expecting him to get so surly and defensive at this point, but he parried her remark with a calm expression. Maybe he had figured out that she was just messing with him. No fun, but that's Rudy for you. Don't go forcing her, mind you. Yes, I know. It always made Zenith a little bit melancholy to see Rudy acting all grown up like this. Turning her attention back to Norn, who had her fill, she gave her pats on the back until she burped, then placed her back in the crib. Cleaning her chest off, she realized that Rudy was staring at her again. Whoever does marry him might have a tough time. Sylvie seemed to be the leading candidate at the moment, and that girl tended to do anything that Rudy told her. She may not be able to say no, even if she wanted to. Zenith figured if worse comes to worse, she'll have to set Rudy straight. Paul might teach him how to seduce women, but Zenith would teach him how to treat them right. Alright then, if worse comes to worse, I'll just have to set him straight. Norn looked satisfied, and didn't take long for her to nod off in her crib. Stroking her head, Zenith murmured softly, "That's the way. Drink lots of milk, get lots of sleep, and grow up nice and healthy." Unfortunately, Aisha picked this moment to start fussing a little herself. Rudy tore his eyes away from Zenith's chest and peered down at Aisha. He inspected Aisha just as he did Norn. After a moment, still holding her, he turned to Zenith with an uncharacteristically anxious expression. She did like seeing different emotions on Rudy's face. Again, noting back earlier that he's always got that serious expression. But she didn't want him looking that troubled very often. "What's the matter, Rudy?" Mother, Miss Lilia is a little late today, isn't she?" "Come to think of it, you're right." Zenith was worried by this. But then she remembered that a group of merchants from the Citadel of Roa were in town. Lilia had mentioned that she'd be buying a little more than usual. Rudy then spoke up again. "Well, you see, about Aisha." "Yes? I think she's hungry too." Oh, I see. They tended to feed the babies at the same time, so it made sense that they were both hungry around the same time. Normally, she would feed Norn, and Lilia would feed Aisha. It made sense why Rudy had an awkward expression. Slowly, cautiously, he continued, clearly choosing every word with care. Mother, there's no telling when Miss Lilia will get back. I'm sure Aisha could wait for a while, but if she keeps crying, Norn might wake up too. So, as a faithful member of the Mills Church, Zenith was still unhappy with both Paul and Lilia for breaking their marriage vows. She knew that they didn't subscribe to her faith, but it was never pleasant to have someone disregard your values, and Rudy had obviously picked up on this. He was afraid his suggestion might upset Zenith. He was worried that she might even take it out on his little sister. The boy was clearly anxious. From his perspective, they were all equal family, and given where things stood now, she ought to feel the same way. Still, Zenith wondered if it was a good idea. What if breastfeeding Aisha made her feel anger or revulsion? What if Rudy seen hatred on her face and despised her for it? Oh, really now? What are you going on about, Rudy? Come on, give me Aisha. Zenith answered with the kindest voice that she could, trying to shake off her own uncertainty. Of course, he slowly, hesitantly deposited Aisha into her arms. After exposing her other breast, Zenith lifted Aisha up to it. She probably would have felt a little upset if Aisha had kicked and fussed at this point, but she latched right on and started gulping down immediately. Too quietly for Rudy to hear, Zenith let out a sigh of relief. She felt the same exact way that she felt when she was feeding Norn. Her heart was full of warm, pleasant awareness of her own motherhood and nothing else. How odd. Why was she so hesitant, even slightly, to bring Aisha to her breast? Why did she think that would make her feel unhappy? Why did she think that this was some sort of trial that she had to endure? It was all so much simpler than she thought. She was a mother. Nothing else mattered. Whether you're a member of the Mills Church or not, it doesn't really make a difference when it comes down to things like this. Zenith spoke up. She's certainly guzzling it down, isn't she? Well, your milk is delicious, Mother. This is Rudy. That's an odd attempt at flattery, Rudy. Seeing Aisha happily suckling and the content expression on Zenith's face, Rudy smiled with obvious relief. He clearly regarded protecting his little sister as his duty. Very admirable. His desire to become a good big brother, worthy of their adoration, seemed to be quite genuine. Rudy spoke up. It's not flattery. I still remember how it tastes. Do you now? Zenith chuckled softly as she reached down and stroked Aisha's little head. After a while, she finished up and was put to nod off on her crib. Rudy watched from a distance, his gaze warmer than usual. Hey, Rudy. Yes, what is it? Mind if I stroke your head a bit? You don't need to ask for my permission. Feel free to pet me anytime. Rudy leaned his head towards Zenith invitingly. She reached down and began to stroke his head gently. Rudy was their first child, and he never needed much from them. Most of the time, she didn't feel like she was much of a parent to him. But recently, that had begun to change. She truly was this boy's mother. He truly was her son. Sensing a bit of warmth, Zenith turned in its direction. Spring sunshine was streaming through the window. Outside, golden fields of wheat stretched out as far as the eyes could see. It was a picture of a peaceful spring afternoon. As she gazed quietly at it, a sense of happiness washed over her. For some reason, she felt utterly content. I wish this moment would last forever. Me too. Zenith figured that he found this little domestic scene pleasantly tranquil too. But it was only thanks to him that she could feel the same. If he hadn't intervened, as a pious member of the Mills Church reduced to one wife of two, she probably would have stormed out of the house with Norn, cursing her misfortune, or stayed behind perhaps to take out her resentment on Lilia and Aisha. Thank goodness for Rudy, she thought. If he wasn't such a wise and clever little boy, she never would have experienced this blissful moment. Rudy. Yes, Mother. Thank you for being born. He looked up startled. After an awkward pause, he scratched his head and answered with an adorably bashful tone of voice. Well, thank you for having me. She replied with a chuckle of amusement. And that is Extra Chapter, the mother of the Greyrat family. Such a good chapter. Such a good chapter. This is one of those ones where you hear a lot of, when I hear from light novel readers, it's like one that they read on a regular basis. It's like so many people just keep reading this chapter. It's such a good chapter. One hand, because it's Zenith, and Zenith is a great mom. On the other end, there's so much context in here. Like I said before, there's a whole aspect that Rudy himself doesn't internalize these thoughts, but yet other people see it. They see that he seems to love his little sisters. They see that he has this anxiety. They see his fear. They see what he doesn't really verbalize. You see how Zenith has so much pain from what happened. Sadly, as you're even watching through the anime, and it's even in the light novel quite a bit, is you don't really get a sense of what Zenith was thinking about during this whole ordeal with Lilia and Paul. There is a brief segment that was skipped in the anime that Rudy, after talking Zenith into it, goes to see Zenith afterwards, knocks on her door, and she opens it up, and she basically admits that she didn't believe him. She didn't believe this idea that Paul used his authority to control Lilia. And again, even through Lilia's perspective, we see that she seduced him, pulled him into the bedroom because she knew that Paul wasn't able to sleep with Zenith because she was pregnant. There's all these things that Zenith had seen. She's not stupid. But it's all because of Rudy sort of guiding the conversation and showing her that he didn't want to lose this. Now, from an outsider's perspective, you can see quite a bit of it is this idea that this is Rudy's sanctuary. Like, he doesn't want to lose this. But he has been leaving the home. But he does want this family to stay together. He knows that it would probably cause a lot of problems if they all got broken apart. And again, fearing for the safety of Lilia, herself, and her baby. It's a lot of things that these individuals don't really get the whole picture of Rudy, but they get quite a bit of it. Again, Paul, throughout the entire first volume, is constantly struggling with him being a parent to Rudy. He wants to be a father to Rudy, but Rudy always looks at him like he's an insect, like he's more smart than him. That first time that Paul is trying to correct Rudy because he thinks that he was fighting some of the kids in the town, he's completely overthrown by Rudy. Rudy knows how to talk him down, and it frustrates him. There's all these difficulties and insecurities that these characters have that only come to fruition when we see their perspectives. And again, this is that rare opportunity to get Zenith's perspective right here. We get this full context to everything she's been thinking throughout this entire first volume, what she thinks about with Lilia and Paul, how she's still struggling with the even idea of this. Again, even having her own doubts if she would want to bring Aisha to her chest. Will she be disgusted? It's not like she wants to throw Aisha out of the window. It's not like she wants to get rid of them, but she's afraid that she will. She's afraid that if she picks her up, what if I get repulsed? She's afraid of that. What if I'm fine with picking her up and putting her right here, but I'm afraid what I'll think if she kicks away. I'm afraid that I'll be repulsed. I'm afraid the moment that she connects, I'm going to hurt. And then she realizes, no, wait, this is a daughter of mine. I am a mother. That's the important thing. Throw away everything else right now. Right here now, I am a mother. Aisha needs me. And it took Rudy to kind of nudge me. What would she have done if Rudy wasn't standing there and going, Aisha's hungry? Yes, she'd be flustered trying to figure out why is Aisha upset. And then eventually, yeah, maybe she might come to the realization that she's hungry and then go, but maybe she can wait. Maybe she can wait for Lilia. Rudy nudges her. But I don't think Lilia's going to be here for a while. Can you do something? It's a really great perspective because honestly, Rudy, of course, is an outsider. He, even at this point right here, he still is an outsider. He hasn't connected, this is my family. But this is one of those rare opportunities where we see from somebody else's perspective, no. I think instinctually, without him even thinking about it, he plays the part. He knows what he's doing, and he just jumps in there. And he's been a great help. And again, that's another one of those things that we kind of get skipped from the anime adaptation is that whole segment where Norn and Aisha's being born and how much he's working furiously to help everybody. He's healing Zenith constantly because she's having a breech birth. And that aid that he's giving in that situation is showing that he does care for this family. Even if he doesn't fully vocalize it. Even if he doesn't have the expression that you'd normally see. Which has always been that fear that everybody has. Why doesn't he act like everybody else does? Why doesn't he have expressions like normally? Why doesn't Rudy see me as a mom? She feels inadequate and feels disconnected from him. But there's these brief moments where you realize, no, I am this kid's mom, and he's my son. It's so good. It's such a good chapter. And me reading further on ahead past the anime. This is actually my first time rereading this since I first read it and did a Mushoku Monday for it. And it's just like, there's so much in here that I didn't see before. And it's just such a good chapter. First volume is still up there as one of my favorite volumes of all time with the series. It's just a fantastic opening. Anyways, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, make sure that like button down below, comment, let me know what you thought of this chapter. And if you're an anime only, let me know if this kind of changed your perspective on Zenith as a character. And yes, technically Rudeus. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button to get my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. I try to do a Mushoku Sundays every Sunday where I go through skip contents of the anime. Hopefully be able to do it every Sunday until the anime comes back, but we'll see. Additionally, every Monday, if you're a novel reader, I do a Mushoku Monday where I do a reading of the novel series and analysis of it. Currently, again, we're beyond season 2. But yes, if you like this content and you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, membership button down below. I greatly appreciate it, but it supports the channel. It means so much to me, and y'all take care.